Counter-Narrative News really proudly presents a brand new series on the revolutionary born in Bengal in colonial India, Manibendranath Roy, born Manibendranath Bhattacharya, or known as M.N. Roy. He was born on the 21st of March 1887, so we just missed his birth anniversary, which was yesterday, and he died on the 25th of January 1954. An extraordinary figure in the histories and legacies of anti-colonial revolutionary struggle. He was agitated into political action because of British colonialism, obviously in India and his home state of Bengal. He joins the restive anti-colonial forces coming out particularly from the Hindu community, but clearly early on has a non-sectarian political kind of approach to his work. During this time and in the outbreak of the First World War, like many other revolutionaries around the world, particularly from the British colonies, they thought that the German colonialists would assist them in their struggle against the British. So M.N. Roy travels through all over Southeast Asia, really, Malay, Indonesia, Indochina, present-day Vietnam, Philippines, Japan, Korea, and China. He meets the nationalist leader Sun Yat-sen, trying to get weapons from him. Sun Yat-sen refuses in Hong Kong. He has no luck really getting any arms from the German colonialists, and ends up catching a boat that lands him in San Francisco in 1916. And there he travels across, and then he meets another leading Indian nationalist but Hindu sectarian, Lajpat Rai, in New York, which we'll discuss in a further episode, because that's an interesting incident in terms of their meeting in New York and what happens there. And then he ends up also then in Mexico, where he becomes he's a revolutionary figure anyway, and he helps to set up and found the Mexican Communist Party. And he helps to also look after a person called Borodin, who is a leading international activist for Lenin's Communist International, or the Comintern. And because of his support to Borodin in Mexico, Borodin reports back to Lenin. Lenin basically warmly welcomes M.N. Roy into the leadership of the Comintern, and M.N. Roy then contributes to Lenin's leadership. And the way Lenin allowed M.N. Roy to critique him and adopt his criticism and develop his theory of the anti-colonial struggle, moving away from supporting quote-unquote bourgeois democratic national liberation struggle against colonialism to supporting the more revolutionary elements of that from the workers and peasants and oppressed intelligentsia and students, etc., so as to ensure that the revolutionary impetus of the colonial people is assured, rather than backing those who compromise and sell out in the more wavering and unstable capitalist forces of the anti-colonial struggle. So today, the first thing we're going to share is an article from the 18th of September 1919. So this is very much a time where M.N. Roy is really kind of coming into his own in the global communist leadership as well. And it's called Hunger and Revolution. So to quote, "The absolute control of the means of communication by the governments of the victorious powers has prevented the general public from knowing anything which might prove disagreeable for those powerful nations which hold undisputed sway over the earth and the millions of human beings that inhabit it. Because England has captured every route by which news could filter out of India, the world knows only what England wishes on the present condition of the Indian people. As a result of this policy, in force even before the war, there was a prevalent belief among the people of the Western Hemisphere that the benevolent administration of India by the English had resulted in all the benefits of peace and prosperity for that remote nation. Imperialist propagandists have been telling the general public for the past 50 years that before the advent of the British, the Indian people had never enjoyed these blessings, and that under the amiable protection of 350 million Indians living in contentment and happiness. But the time has come in which the world events move so swiftly that even the stifled voice of India's starving millions reaches to the remotest corners of the earth. The barbarous crimes committed by the English in India for more than a century and a half have reached their climax, and even the all-powerful hand of perfidious Albion finds itself unable to keep the world any longer in ignorance of the shocking reality. At the present moment, India is stricken by famine such as it was never known before, even in her long and tragic history of famines under British rule. The causes of this terrible epidemic are the economic exhaustion of the people and the exportation of all foodstuffs to feed the Allied armies during the 4 years of the war. To the mingled cries of the dying masses, the British government has responded with bombs and bayonet and the passage of even stricter and more repressive laws to prevent the voice of an oppressed people reaching the outer world in its appeal for help. The few notices published in the American-Canadian press testify that conditions in India have acquired alarmingly critical proportions. The whole country is in a state of rebellion, and the British government is using all of its powers to suppress the uprising of a people that has been crushed beneath a tyranny without precedent in the annals of the civilized world. Early in April, the revolution burst forth simultaneously in the 4 greatest provinces of the Indian Empire, in Bengal, Bombay, the Punjab, and the United Provinces, which together form almost 2/3 of the country. Hundreds of lives have been lost on both sides, that of the government as well as the revolutionists. The ancient city of Amritsar was one of the centres where the fighting first began. It was besieged by English troops, which bombarded the entire population from airplanes, killing hundreds of innocent people and partially destroying the great temple of God sacred to the Sikhs and a marvellous architectural monument. In all parts of the country, English banks were sacked by the revolutionists. The northern part of Calcutta, the greatest metropolis of India, was in their control for 4 days. The principal industrial and commercial cities such as Bombay, Ahmedabad, Lahore, Delhi, the seat of the Viceroy, Allahabad, Gujranwala, etc., were converted into battlegrounds between the totally disarmed people and, on the other, the military forces of the government, completely equipped with machine guns, armoured cars and aeroplanes from which bombs were hurled upon the masses of helpless men, women and children. All the different elements which form the Indian nations, the Hindus, Sikhs, Mohammedans and other great communities, have united themselves in determined opposition to the British tyranny which has subjected the entire people to a veritable reign of terror with its recent repressive legislation and merciless enforcement of martial law. The repressive measures known as the Rowlatt Acts were passed 3 months ago in the face of unanimous opposition of the Indian people. By these acts, liberty of press, of speech and of platform and meeting are absolutely destroyed. The purpose of the Rowlatt Acts, frankly admitted, is to kill the revolutionary spirit, awaken the people. According to the very confession of the British government, the Indian people are striving for liberty, and the only thing which makes them submit to foreign yoke is the brute force of their oppressors. For 4 years, India has agonized through one of the worst famines known in history. Now that the war is over and everyone seeks to improve the condition of the devastated countries of Europe, conditions in India have become worse. Even the Christian missionaries, who constitute the most sworn and vociferous defenders of British imperialism in India, have united in demanding that the poor infidels must be given food before they can be saved for Christ. End of quote. So really important themes here in terms of colonial looting and extraction of India by the British, the creation of famines, and instead diverting the foodstuffs that India was producing, and Bengal was a leading global producer of foodstuffs and silks, etc. for centuries, that these were exported to assist the colonial warring party of Britain against other colonial warring parties of the First World War, which was just concluded at the time. Obviously, the Amritsar massacre happens also in 1919, and Amritsar and Punjab is referenced here explicitly by M. Roy, as well as UP and Bengal and Bombay. Really inspiring stuff, really fascinating stuff. You can see the non-sectarian united framework of anti-colonial struggle with the emphasis on workers and peasants that's already clearly in M. Roy's works. Really excited that counter-narrative news to be developing this particular series on M. Roy, because he is very little known considering how important he was an influence to the correct anti-colonial, anti-fascist, left revolutionary politics, which is then adopted by the greatest revolutionary, arguably, of the anti-colonial socialist movement ever, which is Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Bolshevik Revolution. We also have to add in, very importantly, which we've been amiss until this point, James Connolly, leader of the Easter uprising, which is just coming up, the commemoration in Ireland against British colonialism there. The Indians were massively inspired by the Easter uprising, as most anti-colonial people were, as well as Lenin, which really was the Bolshevik resistance and uprising in 1917, and then the 1916 Easter uprising. These two were the major rebellions against the imperialist war, which Lenin denounced. And we'll do a series on James Connolly soon as well. Highly significant figure. So that was the first in the series of Emin Roy, and we do encourage you and we excite ourselves for the next episode for you to engage with us. Many thanks.